Okay. Alrighty, so first of all, how did everyone find the discussion assignments?
They were pretty easy. I actually kind of enjoyed talking with other people about it.
That's good. Hold on 1 second, get the door here. Help the reverb in the camera. Yeah, so I looked over most of your discussions. I liked a lot of them. I felt like you actually put in some paragraphs, which was nice. There weren't a whole lot of one-sentence paragraphs or one-sentence replies, so that's good. I think just about everyone got easy hundreds. So if your grades are all up, so you should be able to check them now, and if you haven't already. If you ever have a problem with one of your grades, and this is for the kids over at the other campuses, like if there's something that doesn't match or if you're worried about something, feel free to email me. For example, won't name names, but I got a student, actually I got 2 or 3 students who got like a 75 or even a 50. And the reason being is they probably missed 1 or 2 replies. They might have thought that they sent the reply, like they thought they hit the submit button and didn't go in, but when I went over it with the chart, I did not see it. Now, sometimes Mr. Belcher makes mistakes. He misses replies, it happens. So if you are sure that you've got those replies in, take snips of those replies and send them to me. Like, hey, here's where they are, and make sure you take a snip of the time and the date that you sent them. It'll mark it for you automatically. So if you actually like show me that, I can go in and be like, oh, I see where they replied. I'll give you the credit for it, and immediately change your grade to what it should be. If you are late on a reply, you may still email me and get back to that, but it will have to be a late grade. So it's still better than getting a 50, I can bump you up, but just a heads up in case that happens. I don't think that happened with anybody in this group as far as like missing one of the replies in the discussion. But if it did, and you can get back to me. Okay, so I want to quickly talk about the essay for a bit. We are going to spend some time in class doing peer edits, so that will happen later. I'm going to shut the camera off in about half hour, 40 minutes total, so this is going to be a shorter lesson, kids, and that's all right. But I want to kind of look over some of your papers, see where you're going with it. Also, another message to you and to the kids across the pond, if you do have a question about your paper or you're not sure, you're like, I don't know if this is a good start, feel free to email me, ask my opinion. I will give it to you as soon as I can and be like, yeah, I think you're in the right direction and you need to fix some things here. So, because I know you want to get a good grade, so you're always welcome to do that. All right, so real quick, we're going to just gloss over what the paper needs to be about. We did this last week, but I wanted to do a quick rerun. So your paper needs to be structurally sound, containing an introduction paragraph, thesis statements, a final conclusion, and 2 or more body paragraphs. I would suggest 3 personally, and a conclusion. So you must have a clear thesis statement and not simply a topic statement. So you're not just writing basic information, you actually do need to have a point. You are answering a question. I mean, that's one of the topics that you pick. You must prove your points by using direct evidence and citations from your studies rather than just asserting them. You must cite at least once from your lecture and once from your book. Now, I went back over this last week. The syllabus directions are a little bit different, and I would suggest going with the syllabus directions. I would suggest at least twice from your book and at least twice from the lectures. The reason being, the paper is going to be sizable enough that you want to make sure that your paragraphs have at least 1 or 2 sources per paragraph. That would be my suggestion. Your introduction and your conclusions usually don't need sources because you're just wrapping it all up or introducing. But your body is where you want that actual substance to be. Another suggestion, just if you want to look and see better grading, just more for me to be more impressed, try to avoid using quotations. Try to use paraphrasing more. So the difference, in case you're not sure, paraphrasing is where you take somebody's quote or somebody's information and you put it in your own wording. Now, let me ask you guys, do you still have to cite it?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. It is still their information. But by rewording it into your own sentences, it makes your paper flow better rather than just seeing a random quote kind of popping in every few sentences. You can still use quotes, it's not going to be doc, but if you really want to be a better writer and just impress your professors more, work on paraphrasing more. So that's a suggestion. Alright, essay needs to be between 500 and 600 words long. Okay, basic rule of thumb for me on this one is it must be above 500 words or there will be a doc. If it's like 499, it's not going to be doc, but if it's like 480, 470, it's not enough. Make sure you check the word count on Microsoft Word because it will give you a word count. And also, if your word count says 500 exactly, you're probably under the word count because heading and works cited does not count. So my suggestion would be probably about 525 is your safest bet. Yes.
You could just highlight everything but the heading, and it
Yep.
shows the amount that's there.
That's exactly right. So a good student pointed out, you can just highlight just your writing portion and then check that, check the word count, and it'll give it to you. If you go above 600 words, again, I'm probably not going to dock you. If it's like 650 or if it's like 700, that's okay. If you really need a few extra sentences to make your point, that is fine. If you go to like 1,000 words, it's a little bit extreme and you don't need to spend that much time on it. This is not a very hard essay, so don't kill yourself on it. Sorry about that. Wonderful McAfee security system is timely as usual. Alright, your essay should be written in formal college level prose. That means no contractions such as it's, that's, it should be it is, that is, and so on. No first person. That means we, me, myself, I, and no second person. It doesn't say that, but that's just a given. So second person is you. Like if I'm talking to you directly, I'm saying you would be good at this, or y'all, or anything like that, that's all second person. Every formal paper, unless otherwise specified, should always be third person.
Our is allowed, right?
Our is first person.
Oh.
Yep. Anything that refers to yourself in any context or to directly to another person in any context is first or second, and it's improper. It should always almost be referring to the third party, so like almost like you're detached from it. You're kind of standing out from it and describing the events. That's another way to think about it. But yeah, so this will be a doc. It's not a major pet peeve for me, but it does stand out, and it will be a doc if I see it. So your paper must be submitted in PDF. So let me rephrase that from last week. You've got to remember to send these in PDF format to the submission section. If you send a Microsoft Word document directly or even a Google document directly, it'll show the file, but when I click on it, I won't be able to read it. It'll actually come up as blank. It's just the way that TFC's program works. So the only way I'm able to read it is if it is in PDF format. If for any reason you do send a PDF format and it shows it's submitted and I still can't see it, I will let you know. I will send you an email and be like, something's up, try and resend it. Also, make sure when you do this submission that you click the submission button twice at least. Because, for whatever reason, TFC's thing, when you click submit, it does like an initial check, like, oh, are you sure you want to submit? And you got to click it again to like make it go through. I've had students mess up on that where they submitted it and then they just got off thinking, I'm done, and then I never got their paper. So double check that. If for any reason you're sure you submitted something and it's not showing as submitted or whatever, again, email me, let me know. Always feel free. Okay, so we're not going to go over the questions too much, but I do want to discuss some stuff about the questions. So for example, which was a better place to live, Jamestown or Plymouth? If you want to pick another colony to compare one of these two, or two different colonies that fancies you, that you fancy and you like, go ahead and do it. I'm giving you my consent that if you have a different colony you want to pick, you may do that. Let's see where I've got another one here. How can Native Americans react to European encroachment differently? So this is another great one. If you want to pick a broad set of tribes, like say you have 3 different examples of tribes, one per paragraph, that's fine. Or if you want to focus on one tribe, you can do that too. So if you're like, man, I really thought it was interesting how the Powhatan Indians react with Jamestown, you can focus on that if you just want to do that. So I'm giving you a little bit of leeway, provided you're still mainly on the topic. I just want to make that clear. So it doesn't have to be extremely specific, provided it's within the topic. Another one is the dilemma of the Declaration. If you want to make that more about slavery and the slavery question, you can. If you want to make that more about the Founding Fathers, you can, because they were all debating on that dilemma. So like I said, provided you're within the wheelhouse of the title, I'm going to let you kind of have some leeway with it. Make sure you have your sources and other stuff. Okay, so another thing I want to go over, because we had a few students get confused on this, and I totally understand why, because there's 2 sections to it, and it's kind of weird. When you're going in for discussion, this topic here is what you want to click on if you're posting a discussion. So, and I had a few students who thought it was the bottom one, and they emailed me like I don't see anybody's discussion because you clicked on the wrong thing. And I understand the confusion because it's kind of weirdly sectioned and usually everything else is very clear. So you're going to click on this topic, like Georgia Loyalists, for example, and when you go down the screen, you'll actually see a list. It should look something like this. You'll actually see a list of responses. You can click on any one of these responses and give something. Now, my suggestion, I've actually noticed that was kind of funny. A lot of campuses tend to stick together. So like campus students tend to enter each other's campuses and then they avoid other students. Don't do that. You know, keep in mind, these are your fellow students. You may not see them, you may not know them, but they're taking the class with you. I'm not saying anyone did or didn't do it, but feel free. I mean, if you've got a topic that another student across campus has posted, talk about it. Like, absolutely. They won't bite, theoretically. So they might, I don't know. So I just wanted to go across that. I think, again, most people did good responses, good replies. Try to keep that up. Remember to keep that word count going. Another thing I want to talk about, and this was actually an error on my part. I made a slight mistake because, again, I'm technically taking the class from a professor and using it. So, where it talks about depicting several Georgians, debating the American Revolution, and then reading this PDF article. I changed this because before there was no bold here and there was no click this link. And I assumed it was kind of something to throw away from like another lesson he had that he just didn't have a PDF because I looked and there was no link to it. I didn't realize that the read this PDF article is the link. So I went in and changed it so you know to go in and click on that article. It's okay if you didn't catch it this time. Like I said, that was my error, and I don't think you had to have it to make a good discussion. If you used it, good on you. Awesome. But what I'm going to do for the rest of the discussions is I'm going to go and check and see, okay, are there links, and I'm going to highlight those links so that they won't be hard for you to figure out in the future. So, slight oversight on my part, but otherwise, you were good. Other than that, I think we're okay on this. Does anybody have any questions about assignments or papers or anything like that?
There's a discussion every week, right?
Every other week. There's like 4 discussions total.
Oh, okay.
So there's 2 papers, 4 discussions, and just a heads up, now that you brought that up, I do want to remember, make sure that you're doing 1 main post and 3 replies. I did catch a couple students that only did 2 and then stopped on after 3. And again, they might have meant to send a 3rd and just forgot or whatever. Make sure you're sending 1 post, 3 replies. That's 4 posts total per discussion. If you want to send more than 3 replies, you are welcome to. It's a good way to guarantee an A, but you don't have to. Just make sure you at least get that number. I don't think it'll be too difficult because y'all were saying, you know, that it's actually the discussion is pretty easy. They're not difficult to follow. And as long as you're using some evidence from the books in your main posts and supports, it's going to be fun. Okay, yes?
Do you have to use quotes in the post?
You do not have to use quotes. No. Again, really all you're doing is just using the book to help you support your argument. You don't have to cite directly. You don't have to use like MLA citations for a discussion. Now for the essay you do, but for the discussion you don't.
How do you want us to cite the lecture videos? Because I like know how to cite videos, but there's like no information on how to
Go to Owl Purdue for how to cite a video. It will show you how to do an MLA, and usually it will involve a timestamp. So it'll be similar to like a book or a video or something like that, but you'll actually indicate Melton at 111, and that lets me know, oh, that's the part she's talking about. So obviously there's no pages, you would cite the timestamp. But go to PurdueOwl.com and it will tell you how to do that.
You respond to the TFC, right? Did you respond to my emails on the TFC account, Outlook,
I did, but I got a weird error message, and you might want to contact IT about that because it basically said that this student didn't exist. And I thought that was really weird. I was like, because obviously you do, and you're in my student list, and I got the email, but it wouldn't let me, it came back, the response came back. So check with IT on that and contact them.
I was checking my emails to the TFC, so I never got your response on any of it. I was like,
I did send one, I promise.
yes, I know. Yeah. I talked to the story, she's like, yeah, you sent it on the TFC. It's fine.
Yeah, so I definitely sent a response, but one thing to make sure, and I think you did, but to make sure you do it, and this is again for the kids in all the other campuses, if you do have a question, make sure it's from your college email. Because if you send it outside, I can't respond. Like, it literally won't let me respond. So that might have been, I don't know if you did or not.
I did.
Okay, that's why then. Okay, that explains it. So it must be from your college email, or else I literally cannot answer it. I'm actually bound by FERPA law, and also just literally the program is designed so it won't let me do it. So I can't even cheat on that if I wanted to, which I wouldn't, because I'm a good professor. Okay, so that's all we've got on that. I would like to spend some time going over a video for setting up an essay, just outlining and plotting. We're not going to spend the entire time on this, but I want y'all to get an idea of what I'm looking for. It's a brief video, and We're going to play here, and I may stop it a few times, and then we will watch a crash course video, and then what time we have left, we'll turn the video off and actually do some of this paper peer editing stuff.
Well, good morning or afternoon, wherever you happen to be, and welcome to our discussion of outlining
And I will turn the light off.
The basic idea behind outlining is that you lay out your basic essay in advance so that you can try to handle a lot of the problems up front. You may have heard the old saying that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's very much the case here. Well, I hope an obvious question that's popped into your mind is, why outline? What's the point? Why go to all of this extra trouble and make this extra step, especially if you just want to get done with your essay? Well, the long and short of it is that an outline helps you to prevent having to go back and fix a lot of problems.
Okay.
I'm
not going to let him talk too much because I just want to kind of cover this real quick. So, what we were supposed to be doing today is you're bringing essentially the outlines into or draft of your paper in, but if you have not done this already with history essays or really in any college class you're in, when you got papers like this, the first thing I recommend doing is setting up an outline like this. And the picture of the skeleton is kind of funny because it is exactly that. It's a skeleton of your paper. You're getting a base idea of what you're going to be writing. It'll make writing a lot quicker and a lot easier. I know it sounds like more work to have to create an outline before writing, but just as someone with experience in college classes, if you just kind of start writing, it's actually more work because then you have to keep going back and changing things and it drives you nuts. So try to bite the bullet, and if you haven't already, do a quick outline. You'll actually see an outline on the papers I'm going to hand you toward the second half of class, but yeah, I wanted to cover that. We're going to skip ahead a little bit. Let's see, what should an outline have? Yeah, what should an outline have? Okay.
I'm just 2 or 3 words. Other people seem to think that an outline must be 15 pages long. I've actually seen some people write outlines that were significantly longer than the final paper. So what do we mean? What should an outline have? Well, the answer is that it is the minimum that is useful to you. For some people, that will be only a few words. Other people thrive on the idea of being very, very well organized, and they're going to have much, much, much more. But use what works best for you. And I would encourage you to experiment with the different levels of detail until you know for sure.
Okay, pause on what he said there. So one thing about doing an outline is try to find a system that is more efficient for you. For me personally, it's like color coding. It sounds weird, but for whatever reason, my brain just triggers with colors. So if I see like red, 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 I know they're all related. If I say green, 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 I know they're all related. So maybe a color coding system, maybe a number system, if you see numbers better. But essentially, you're creating the absolute minimum that you need to understand what you're writing about. You don't have to write a whole lot of crazy stuff per line. I definitely would include, it says here, and I agree, I definitely would include a thesis statement, because why would you need the thesis statement in your outline?
Because it basically describes what your entire essay is about.
Exactly. It's a constant reminder of what your essay is going to be on. So let's say you pick 3 points, and point A and point B are exactly reflective of your thesis statement, but point C doesn't really reflect it. So what should you do with point C?
Get rid of it.
Huh?
Get rid of it.
Yeah, change it. Or make it reflect your thesis more. So yeah.
We're not turning the outlines though, are we?
No, you're not turning this in for a grade. This is what we're doing today is practice. The essay is the only thing you're going to have to turn in, as far as like actual grading homework, the official essay. The reason I'm going over the outline is because I feel like this will actually save you time and actually make your papers, well, just render your papers automatically better. They'll look neater. And I'm a big fan of neat papers. It's easier to read and it's easy to give a good grade on. So if I have to spend like 20 minutes like going over all the little problems that I see in your paper, it may not be a great grade, but if I'm like, hey, you know what, they put a lot of effort into this, that's really good MLA, good thesis statement, good conclusion, I see the points, it's going to be quick, it's going to be an easy day. That's typically how I go over it. So all right, let's see, move on. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Let me see if there's yeah, let's move on over here. I think this is what I need.
With that basic question, so here's a hypothetical. How important is the Battle of Gettysburg to the American Civil War?
So this would be a research question.
That's our question, and that's our starting point. Next, we move on to answer that question. Again, keeping focus down to a single sentence. How important is the Battle of Gettysburg to the American Civil War? The Battle of Gettysburg, while an important fight, did not decide the outcome of the war. That should be clear, concise, and to the point. point. Since it's a single sentence, it's very focused. Alright, so we've got our thesis statement, and then you can see how I've unpacked it here to 3 example points. Hopefully you'll be able to notice.
So, and this is probably where we're going to end on this video. Like I said, I'm going to spend too much time, but this right here makes it very important. So the first thing you're doing is you're posing the question, which in this case, you already have the questions. They're on the top of the list. Yay, you have to do that. This would be like your answer. So the thesis statement is essentially your answer to the question. And in this case, the answer is, the Battle of Gettysburg, while an important fight, did not decide the outcome of the war. That is a great thesis statement. It makes a point. It's easy to follow. Now, your outline is going to look like this. You got 3 points, okay? First of all, these 3 points will probably be mentioned in your introduction paragraph, and it leads into the 3 points. But each of these is a paragraph, a potential paragraph. If you can write a paragraph around all 3 and provide support, easy paper, easy finish. And you guys know this, once you start getting used to the structure of how a basic paper is written, really the paper writes itself. You're just kind of filling in information using sources, and it doesn't become too difficult. So provided that you have this structure, it will be much faster. Because if you write the thesis statement, you're like, oh, it's a great thesis statement, and then you just try to write the paper from that, you're going to go off. You're going to go off topic. I've done it myself, and I don't know how many countless times where I've had professors who've been like, hey, this paragraph is great, this paragraph is great. I have no clue where you went with paragraph number 3. I don't even know where you're going with that. And because I didn't take the time to put the structure in. So that was just my point. I wanted to go over that. So for you guys on the camera and for in this class, suggestion, if you've not done it already, come up with an outline. It can be anything you want as far as structure, whatever makes it easy for you. I would not make it complicated. I'd make it like a thesis statement, 3 main points, and a conclusion statement. That's what I would do. And then write your paper filling in those blanks. I think it'll make it a lot easier. Other than that, any questions on this? Okay, yeah, I didn't want to spend too much time because you guys know how to do it, but I just want to make sure. Alright, we're going to finish the video, the in-class video, by watching a crash course. Sorry, I hit the fan. My bad. A crash course thing real quick, and then we're going to take some time in class to actually work on papers. Let's see, where is this? Oh, it's the downloaded video. Okay, so this is crash course for the Constitution. This is occurring sort of a little after the Civil War, during the Civil War, essentially the establishment of the Constitution. Why is the Constitution so important to our nation? One thing I can tell you right now, I'm not 100% sure if he goes over it, but essentially our Constitution in the United States is actually very, very unique. There have been other constitutions, but none that have allowed for a governmental body quite like what we have, with the extensive checks and balances system, with the extensive rights given to the people that we have, even with the moral systems put in place. It was very clear, it was very concise, and it was very planned by the Founding Fathers. They took their time with this Constitution. Is it perfect? No. Is it as close to perfect in history as we've seen? Arguably, maybe. It's kind of hard to beat this, so you'll get a chance to kind of see where this comes from in history. So I'll turn the lights off again. Sorry, I can't see. So, is there a question? Oh, question? Yes. All right, here we go.
This is Crash Course through U.S. History, and today we're going to talk about the United States Constitution. And in doing so, we're going to explore how the American style of government became the envy of the entire world, so much so that everyone else copied us. What's that thing? We're not going to talk about other countries stealing our form of government because no other country stole our form of government? That doesn't seem possible, Stan. No, Stan, not the libertars. Kill the intro. So today we're going to learn why the green areas of non-America didn't copy us. Alright, so as Americans may dimly remember from history classes, the constitutional system we've been living under since 1788, the year of the first presidential election, was not the original American government. The first government set up by the Continental Congress was called the Articles of Confederation, and it was, in a word, bad. In 2 words, it was not good, which is why it only lasted 10 years. The problem with the Confederation is that it wasn't so much a framework for a national government as it was a firm league of friendship, which unfortunately only sounds like a team of care superheroes. The Articles set up a government that consisted of a one-house body of delegates, with each state having a single vote, who, acting collectively, could make decisions on certain issues that affected all the states.
Okay, so let's go and talk about this a bit. I want to just talk about this issue. We'll be getting into the
body of delegates, with each state having a...
Okay, So what might be a problem with every single state only having one vote?
Well, for one thing, if it's like a, I'm trying to think how to word this, but if it's if it's an even amount of votes, then they could tie, and then they would have no way to really decide on that decision.
That's certainly one issue, but also, does every state have the exact same population? No. Should 30,000 people have the exact same influence as, say, 5 people? Probably not. Probably a little bit more states. So they had to come up with a system that gave deference to countries or with states with higher populations. That's the first problem. Another problem is kind of the issue of one side or the other. It doesn't really feel like you're getting fully represented if, let's say, you only get one vote and you have a lot of people that feel the otherwise. Like it's like, oh well, we have 20 electoral college votes, we got 8 of them, but the other guy got 12. Fair enough. Versus, wow, a lot of us voted and we only see one vote in our favor. It doesn't offer as much control or freedom as you would think. We moved on from this to more of an electoral college system, which is hilariously the funny rule of thumb with the electoral college system is it's always unpopular to the losing side in the presidential race. Every time. Every time a president wins, he wins pretty much because of the electoral college. It's been like that for a long time. A lot of people assume that we are a direct democracy in the sense that, oh, well, the people's vote decides who the president is. To some degree, we do influence it, but actually our votes go to the electoral college, and the electoral college makes the decision. Now, they're supposed to largely side with the majority population of votes, but they do have some autonomy over that. And what will often happen is a president may be ahead by, say, 20,000 electoral college votes, or I'm sorry, I'm going way over a number, like 20-something electoral college, 200 electoral college votes, but the population that voted against him may have been over 200,000. He may have lost by that, but he still wins. Because it's a state's votes, not just a numbers votes. So we've kind of come across an interesting system with the electoral college, and often what will happen is people feel cheated when they see that the electoral college has voted over, like, for one or the other, when the number of population votes actually exceeds that. It does happen. So I think one example is Rutherford B. Hayes, if I remember correctly. I think it was that president, where he won the popular election by over 300,000, which at the time was a large number of people, and still lost. I'm sorry, I think it was Hayes lost. Hayes got it, and it was his opponent that lost the 300,000, excuse me, if I remember correctly. A bit rusty on the numbers there. But yeah, this is giving you an idea of this early attempt at American government.
Single vote, who acting collectively could make decisions on certain issues that affected all the states. There was no president and no judiciary. You could try to tell me that John Hanson, the president of the Congress, was the first American president, but it's just not true. Any decision required 9 of the 13 congressional votes, which pretty much guaranteed that no decisions would ever be made. Supermajorities, always so efficient. But besides the 2/3 requirement, the Congress was very limited in what it could actually do. The government could declare war, conduct foreign affairs, and make treaties. Basically the stuff you need to do to go to war with England. It could coin money, but it couldn't collect taxes. That was left to the states. So if you needed money to, say, go to war with Britain, you had to ask the states politely. The articles could be amended, but that required a unanimous vote, so 0 amendments were ever passed. The government was deliberately weak, which followed logically from Americans' fear of tyrannical governments taxing them and quartering soldiers in their houses and so on. But here's the thing, weak government is like non-alcoholic beer. It's useless. That said, the Articles government did accomplish a couple things. First, it won the war, so yay! Unless you were a slave or a Native American, in which case, probable boo. Second, the government developed rules for dealing with one of the most persistent problems facing the new nation, Ohio, which was called the Northwest, presumably because it is north and west of Virginia. Getting control of the land meant taking it from the Indians who were living there, and the Articles government was empowered to make treaties, which it did. Of course, world history fans will remember the Athenians telling the Melians that the strong do as they can and the weak suffer what they must. And the Americans definitely went to the Athenian school of treaty making. Through treaties signed at Fort Stanley.
I want to pause a minute there, talk about both kind of how we are in relation to the Greeks and the Romans. We often portrayed ourselves, even at the time, as, well, now we're becoming the leaders of the free world. We're becoming representatives of freedom. Greeks thought the same thing. We're a democracy. We believe in democracy. We believe in freedom. As long as you're a Greek citizen, otherwise you're going to be our slave. And unfortunately, with the United States, we haven't quite gotten to the solution of how do we deal with slavery yet. That will come much later and will unfortunately end in a very bloody war. But actually, it really doesn't even end there. But at this time, like he was saying, yeah, it was great if you're a United States citizen and you're from Britain or whatever, then you are now officially free. If you were an African slave or if you were Native American, not so much. Because what did the Native Americans have that we wanted?
Land.
Land. Lots of land. America was boundless. It was the frontier. There was endless land. And when more people come in, more people want land. And so the more people that are coming in from Europe, the further out we spread, trying to make our name. And unfortunately, people did suffer because of it. And that was largely up to us, if I'm being fair. It actually led to a major event that we are actually, this state is actually linked to, which is the Trail of Tears. You've probably heard of it. It often gets talked about more in the Midwestern area, but it actually started in Georgia, believe it or not. You can still go to some areas in Georgia where parts of the Trail of Tears started. It wasn't just one trail, there were actually a bunch of different sections, but there were several sections that started right in our state and actually started partly because of history here that was linked to both land acquisition and the gold rush in the North Georgia mountains. You can actually still go to that history in Dahlonega and New Echota. And I'll give you a quick rundown of that. New Echota was the Cherokee capital, and that was here in Georgia. And essentially, I think it was 1835, if I'm not mistaken. 25 Cherokee men who did not fully represent the Cherokee Nation, but claimed they did, signed over that land for a certain financial gain to the American government. And that was one of the major events that led to the Trail of Tears. Now, a lot of people blame Jackson for the Trail of Tears. Andrew Jackson, you've probably heard of him. He was largely responsible. He was not solely responsible. The president who officiated over the Trail of Tears was actually Martin Van Buren. And that was, again, linked to this state. So, yeah, we actually have a very, very close tie to that event. Did you have a question, or?
Oh, I was just saying, I lived 10 minutes from one of the Trail of Tears.
Okay, yep. You probably lived 10 minutes from where one of them started, but yeah, I believe it. There's at least 3, and I think one of them's in the North Georgia mountains at, oh gosh, I can't remember. It begins with an S, I can't remember it, but.
Sorry.
No, it's somewhere up by the Appalachian Trail. But there's several areas. So, all right.
Macintosh, the Indians surrendered land north of the Ohio River. The biggest accomplishment of the Articles government was the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which set up a process to create 5 new states between the Ohio and Mississippi River. 2 things to know about this. First, it acknowledged that American Indians had a claim to the land and that they had to be treated better if settlers wanted to avoid violence. And second, Stan, can I get the foreshadowing filter? Yes, perfect. The ordinance outlawed slavery in all 5 of the new states. Still, the Articles government was a complete disaster for exactly one reason: it could not collect taxes. Both the national government and the individual states had racked up massive debt to pay for the war, and their main source of revenue became tariffs. But because Congress couldn't impose them, states had to do it individually. And this made international trade a total nightmare, in fact worsened by the British being kind of cranky about us winning the war and therefore unwilling to trade with us. In 1786 and 1787, the problem got so bad in Massachusetts that farmers rose up and closed the courts to prevent them from foreclosing upon their debt-encumbered farm. This is called Shays' Rebellion after Revolutionary War veteran and indebted farmer Daniel Shay. The uprising was quelled by the state militia, but for many, this was the sign that the Articles government, which couldn't deal with the crisis at all, had to go. But not for everyone. Thomas Jefferson, for instance, was a fan of Shays' Rebellion. A little rebellion now and then is a good thing. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants.
I want to talk about this line because this line,
the blood of patriots and tyrants.
Okay, so I want to, really? Alright, I'm just going to leave it there. Alright, so the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. This line, to this day, gets uttered often by, shall we say, I'll put in quotations, patriots. And the reason being is we often equate Jefferson to being one of the more zealous founding fathers. He was definitely in favor of violence all the time. He actually supported some of the tenets of the French Revolution, which, as we know, became one of the bloodiest, worst revolutions ever to occur. So Jefferson is a very interesting historic figure. On one end, he's one of the founding fathers, he's very wise. He actually writes a lot of the documents that we still use today. But on the other end, it's fair to say he can be a fan of violence when needed. And that attitude has largely permeated America even today. I think Americans tend to be very, very, again, I use the word zealous or passionate about who we are, and when rights get trampled on, our brains often immediately turn to, well, we started with a revolution, why not have another? So this is one of those lines that like it often gets debated on with historians. Was it a good line from Jefferson? Was it a negative line from Jefferson? And the other thing to remember about Thomas Jefferson is he often switched his opinion depending on which way the political wind blew. He was very much a politician, he was very good at it, and he would change his mind repeatedly. And you'll even see it in his own writing. He'll on one end he'll talk about peace, on the other he'll talk about war, on one he'll talk about states' rights, and on the other he'll talk about government. So he kind of goes back and forth.
Which is all fine and good, I mean, unless you're the bleeding Patriots or Tyrants. But to most elites, Shays' rebellion showed that too much democratic liberty among the lower classes could threaten private property. Also, people who held government bonds were nervous because without tax revenue, they were unlikely to get paid back. And when rich people feel like something has to be done, something is usually done. Let's go to the thought bubble. The first attempt to do something was a meeting in Annapolis in 1786 aimed at better regulating international trade. Only 6 states sent delegates, but they agreed to meet the next year in Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation. The delegates who met in Philly the next year had a funny definition of revision, though. Rather than make tweaks to the Articles, they wrote a new charter of government, the Constitution, which is, with some significant alterations, the same one that Americans live under and argue about today. Despite what some seem to believe, the 55 men who met in Philadelphia and hammered out a new form of government were not gods, but they were far from ordinary, especially for the time. Most were wealthy, some very much so. More than half had college educations, which was super rare since 0.001% of Americans attended college at the time. About 40% had served in the army during the war. But one thing they all shared was a desire for a stronger national government. The delegates agreed on many things. The government should have executive, legislative, and judicial branches, and should be Republican with representatives.
Okay, so when it's talking about Republican there, it's not talking about the party, it's talking about the nature of the government needed to be a Republican-based government. In other words, that we elect representatives, and then those representatives make decisions for us. But why do you think the Founding Fathers wanted to break it into 3 branches? In fact, while we're on it, can you tell me what these branches were, who are in these branches?
I do not remember that.
All right, who's executive?
Pretty sure president.
President. President of the United States is the executive branch. How about legislative?
Is that all of like representatives and stuff?
Yes, our representatives, House of Representatives, the Senate, and Judicial.
The Supreme Court?
The courts, yes, and including the Supreme Court. So, why would you want to break down a government into 3 separate bodies like that?
Probably to keep what happened with King George from like overruling what he already had as.
Okay, so in other words, in order to keep one single power from dominating everything, right? This forced a checks and balances system so that there had to be essentially, well, I just said it, checks on if one group wants to do something, then the other group has a right to either veto it or back it or to block it. Judicial courts actually arguably have some of the most power in the entire government. A lot of people say it's the president, a lot of people say it's the Senate, a lot of people say it's the courts. I actually tend to lean that a lot of our power comes in the courts because the courts make the ultimate final decision on laws. They can interpret laws how they see fit, and that is the law for however long that court is in session. So you could argue they have the most direct power. But let's be fair, in our history, and it's been throughout our history, not just recently, but we've had presidents that have either overridden or, shall we say, skirted around the courts, and it's almost every president has done it to some extent. So while this is a really awesome system, it's not perfect, and there are loopholes that have been exploited all throughout our history. Another thing is that I want to put emphasis on this. One of the reasons why our document is so unique is this is one of the only times really in history, in the entire world history, where a group of people were able to create a new nation from an old one and actually decide what form of government they wanted. Most historic examples show government simply just happening due to an event, like when a war happened, the government was established itself or whatever, or governments evolved naturally. This is one of the few times, if not the only time in history, where men got to sit around and actually determine a form of government together as a group to say, how are we going to do this effectively? This is extremely rare, and I really can't think of any other examples where it happened in this way. It's also one of the only examples where a full-out, detailed constitution was enacted. Most countries tended to just kind of like change their laws as things happened. Some of them had strict laws, like Britain had laws for monarchy and parliament, which changed with the English Civil War. But this one, This was a full, detailed, extended document that to this day has undergone changes. So we're very unique in that instance, and I want to point that out.
Rather than direct democracy, but the devil appeared in the details. Alexander Hamilton, probably the biggest proponent of very strong government, wanted the president and senate to serve life terms, for example. That idea went nowhere because the overarching concern of almost all the delegates was to create a government that would protect against both tyranny by the government itself and tyranny by the people. They didn't want too much government, but they also didn't want too much democracy, which is why our presidents are still technically elected not directly by regular people, but by 538 members of the Electoral College. This system is...
I want to ask you all another question. Why would you want to avoid either a direct democracy or an oligarchy, which is just a few men in charge?
Because the direct democracy could go all downhill like in England, and then if it was just the people deciding, like all the people, then it could turn into all chaos. But
oh yeah. Well, another word for it is called mob rule.
Yeah.
Mob rule. So what will happen often is an idea gets into a group of people, and those people get super passionate, and then more and more and more people. And a lot of people don't stop to think, is this a good idea? They just go with the group. So it's not so much that they're all thinking together and saying, okay, we're making a good decision for everyone else. It's, well, I want to be with this group, I want to belong, let's do it. And so mob rule can be very dangerous if left unchecked. But at the same time, a strong, strict government who has all the power takes away any autonomy that the people has, therefore you really don't have any freedom to speak of. And so the men in this Constitution knew that they had to find some kind of balance to say, okay, the people have to have rights, they have to have power of some kind, but they also need to be checked by some type of government. This is still being an issue today. Like, it's still being fought over today over, should the government have more power, should it have less power, should we go to a direct democracy and just give all the power to the people, or should we just go back to an old system? We're still fighting.
So Byzantine and strange that when American politicians speak of spreading democracy through the world, they never actually advocate for American-style elections. Thanks, Tom. Yes, I know, you have fantastic elections in Canada. Yep, right, okay, all that too. I get it. Okay, it's U.S. history talk. Also, conflicts between competing interests arose quickly at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, the first being between states with big populations and those with small populations. Large states supported James Madison's Virginia plan, which called for a two-house legislature with representation in both proportional to a state's population, and smaller states, fearing that the big boys would dominate, rallied behind the New Jersey plan. New Jersey. This called for a single legislative house with equal representation for each state, as with the Articles of Confederation. But of course, coming from New Jersey, it had no chance of succeeding, and sure enough, it didn't. Instead, we got the Great Compromise, brokered by Connecticut's Roger Sherman, which gave us two houses. A House of Representatives with representation proportional to each state's population, and a Senate with 2 members from each state. House members, also called congressmen, serve 2-year terms, while senators serve 6-year terms, with 1/3 of them being up for election in every 2-year cycle. The House was designed to be responsive to the people, while the Senate was created to never pass anything, and it was so masterfully designed that it still works to this day. However, this solution created another problem. Who should be counted in terms of representation? Slaveholding states wanted slaves to count toward their population, even though, of course, they could not vote because they were property. States with few slaves argued that slaves shouldn't be counted as people because, just to be clear, none of these dudes were not racist. This issue was solved with the notorious 3/5 compromise for the purpose of determining the population, the total number of white people.
I'm pretty much gonna stop the video here. There's more to it, you can watch it, but I'm gonna stop the video here for the last thing, then we'll get on to writing. So, I want to point this out, that there are a few things about the dilemma of the Declaration. One being that when you've got 2 sections of states, North and South, one that is, the whole economy is based around slavery and the work, versus the North, where it's all based around industry, what problem do you have? What tension is going to arise? I'll try to simplify. You've got one section that does not need slaves, and really, well, I wouldn't say that they necessarily see Africans as equals, they at least typically see them as people, you know, whereas the southern states, like, no, they are property. What's the conflict here?
Equal rights.
Okay, equal rights, right? I'm going to go back to the dilemma. If all men are created equal, which was their wording, does that translate to African slaves? Well, theoretically, yes. And that's a great idea. But what's the problem if you've got a whole section of your entire nation that relies upon that as a market?
Then they're probably going to get
They're probably going to get angry about it and they're not going to follow through. Another thing, and he made a point here, this is really true, while you could argue that the North was somewhat against slavery, or at the very least they weren't for slavery, they didn't necessarily see African Americans as equals. They really didn't. It was still kind of a second-class view, like, well, you're not cattle, but you're also not really us. And that still caused tension even in the North. So in this early stages before Civil War, before the abolition movement really kicked off, Africans really got the short end of the straw. They really did. Because they didn't have a place where they were treated as equals for the longest time. And unfortunately, that is one of the more negative aspects of the establishment of our country. Yes, we beat Britain. Yes, we have freedom for United States citizens. It's great. But we've got a really, really troubled spot right here that we've got to deal with eventually. And sadly, one of the things that the Founding Fathers did frequently up until the Civil War is they kept trying to kick that issue down the road. Why?
Because most of them also owned slaves.
A lot of them owned slaves, so they had a stake. And also, while even Jefferson and Washington both admitted slavery was arguably wrong, they knew something would probably happen. They actually predicted it would happen if they got rid of slavery. And what was that?
Civil War.
Civil War. They actually predicted that was going to happen. They knew it was going to happen. This is one of the reasons why they avoided the question, because they just had gotten out of the Revolutionary War. We don't want another war, especially with the people that we just freed, in the states, the southern states. And after that, you've got the War of 1812, which was another war with Britain coming up here. Well, we're not going to study, but it's coming up. And it's like, we've got constant war. We don't need a civil war. So they kept pushing that question further down the road until it was unavoidable. Now, a lot of people, not a lot of people, excuse me, at the time, there was a general theory that slavery would actually die out. It would actually just kind of die out on its own, and we'll just leave it alone and do it. Now, interesting theory, except for one problem. There was a certain invention, and you might know it, and it might even be on your quiz, so here's a free answer. So what?
Cotton.
The cotton gin. Okay, so the cotton gin was a machine invented by Eli Whitney that essentially made the cotton production explode, which means there was a lot of money to be had there, and slavery spiked right back up and brought the whole problem around again around the 1800s, and that's where we get into the Civil War. You had a question?
The three-fifths and promise, is that where they said that black people only three-fifths?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and is that during the colonial period?
This would have been post-colonial, so like after Revolutionary War.
How long did this last?
Honestly, that is a good question. Off the top of my head, I do not know exactly what year it went out. I want to say it lasted well into the 19th century. It certainly was ended by the Civil War. But the thing about the Civil War is it really didn't end all the problems. It certainly abolished slavery, but even then, Africans were still treated as second-class citizens with very little voting rights. And you'll see that in the Reconstruction, where Africans did get more rights than they had, but not much. So, and it really wasn't until the 60s, the 1960s, where you actually see a lot more freedoms and representation go to the black community. And that, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be getting that far into history, but we'll certainly touch upon it during the Civil War era. So.
I kind of feel like some people nowadays are trying to repay black people because they're doing everything in black favor now, because they feel like because of then, because it came out so racist, they're like, because they kind of had rights in a way, but now I feel like they're trying to repay them back and put everything in them.
And there's, I'm going to try not to get too political either way on it. It's a major political issue right now, that is for sure. Should we pay back the black community right now, even though we personally did not engage in slavery, we personally do not condone it? Or is it, well, we've moved on from that, let's just focus on doing better, just treating everyone as an equal. And that's a hard question to answer, because arguably if we're going to pay reparations to the black community, we've got to pay reparations to a lot of communities, and really everybody's got to pay reparations to everybody. Because if you look at history, there's not a single group of people out there that didn't wrong another group at some point. And that's just, it's a very sensitive issue to talk about. But it is one that we should discuss. We should, especially in our government, be like, okay, is there something we can do to make this better? Or should we simply just learn from the horrible things that we did in the past and be better citizens? And it's definitely one that, in fact, you might even consider that in talking about, I think one of the topics of the research paper was how, today, essentially, how can we learn from the past? You might include that. it's definitely a valid point to consider. All right, I'm going to stop the thing here just because we don't have a lot more time, and I would like to do peer editing, so I will stop the camera and we'll get on to peer edits.